I am incredibly excited to bring up our next storyteller. Jamila Robinson is a former member of the Storytellers Project here at Gannett, but she has moved on to bigger and better and other and more magical things. So it is with great joy that we welcome her back because she was once one of the people who helped share these stories with others. And now it's a great blessing to have you share your story with America tonight, Jamila.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you, Megan. I'm so excited. I want to tell you a little story about my mother. As a food editor, people are always asking me, what I really like to eat, and I usually say lemon tarts. But if they ask me what I like to drink, I usually tell them coffee. Coffee is just one of my favorite things. I love the flavor, the nuttiness. I like it in that flavor as ice cream. I like it with cake. It's how I start my day. I love it so much. I can even make a pot of coffee and go right to sleep. I just find it comforting and satisfying. And even when I'm making things like donuts, that's the thing I want to pipe into it, is something that tastes like coffee. I've been drinking coffee probably since I was a preschooler. I know you aren't supposed to give little kids coffee, but my mother always gave me coffee. She would give me little sips from her coffee, usually around nap time. And nap time was right before her soap operas. She watched Love in the Afternoon, and that was the suite of soap operas. That was All My Children, One Life to Live, and General Hospital. And she would usually make a pot of coffee, not a pot, it's actually just instant coffee. She would use the instant coffee grounds, Folgers, Taster's Choice, whatever we happen to have. And she would make it just one cup at a time because she was the only one who was drinking it. And usually by the start of her soap operas, the coffee had cooled down and she would let me have just a little bit of the coffee. And I love that flavor because it was sweet and nutty, and it was creamy because she put a little bit of milk in it. And then it was nap time. And I love the smell, actually the aroma. That was a word I learned from TV because I was watching the soap operas, and there were all of the commercials that were telling you about coffee, whether it was Juan Valdez and his 100% Arabica beans, or it was to welcome you home from the military or a ski trip. That smell, that aroma was a thing that connected you, made people know that they cared about you. My mother drank instant coffee because she was never much of a cook. She probably still isn't. My mother liked convenience food, and instant coffee was about convenience. A lot of our food was in cans. The fruit, the vegetables, even salmon came out of a can. Things like mashed potatoes, that was a box with an aluminum spout. I knew better about food, even as a kid, because I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. My grandmother did use cans, but not like my mom. My grandmother would take me to Eastern Market in Detroit, and we would walk the stands, and we would shuck corn and talk to the vendors and the farmers. And she taught me how to weigh a green pepper, how a peach you could tell if it was fresh by the smell. And then we would go home to her house and we would bake, we'd make cookies and cakes, and we would whip meringue. And I would get so excited because I loved cooking food with my grandmother. And then I would go home and I would tell my mom, oh, I got to roll pastry, or we made biscuits and we did this by hand and we did this from scratch. And my mom would kind of go, oh, there are better things to do. Women have better things to do than spend all their time in the kitchen. It's not that my mother didn't care about food. She just didn't care about cooking. Cooking was just not her thing. My mother, however, had been, a feminist. People would probably call her a revolutionary. She was a leader in the Black Panther Party. She was the communications secretary and started what's called the Free Breakfast Program. She started this in a chapter in Detroit. And this was because of her study in nutrition. And she knew that children who had a good breakfast had better educational outcomes. And this was one of the many programs that the Black Panther Party started. And my mother was part of the vanguard. She was a woman, she was a feminist, but in the Black Panther Party, gender roles were eschewed. And the women did a lot of the work. They ran the newspaper and the programming, the fundraising. And my mother ran the free breakfast program. She didn't cook for the program she started. A lot of the men did that. But what she wanted was for other children who weren't as fortunate as we were to have the same kind of breakfast that we had, which were the ones like on television, which were balanced. So she cared about food in her own way. So when I would come home and tell her how much fun I had in the kitchen, she probably wasn't that excited about it. But what she would do is she would leave me to my devices. She would let me go into the kitchen with a box of Jiffy cake mix, an egg, some milk, and the electric blender. And she would just leave me to my devices. And I would whip up the mix and bake little cakes in my easy bake oven, burn my fingers on the 100-watt light bulb. And even though she wasn't that excited about it, what it taught me was a kind of independence and what being in the kitchen can do. I didn't see it as drudgery. I saw being in the kitchen as an extraordinary amount of fun and discovery and solitude. I knew that if I wanted food to taste the way that my grandmother made it, and not out of a can and doused in salt, that I needed to learn how to make it myself. And that kind of discovery also brought along quite a bit of creativity. So I would make cakes for my dolls and my Barbies, and then pretend to make them a little pots of coffee. When I was 5, I was homesick from school. And I was sick a lot as a kid, and I kind of had a weak stomach. And I was tucked in my bed, and my mother came into my room and asked me what I wanted to have. And I told her coffee. And so she went to the kitchen, and I could hear her start the water. And then there was a point where I could smell the aroma from the coffee. And I could tell that she had mixed it with just I could smell, I could tell that she had mixed it, and I could smell it wafting into my room. And so when she appeared at my door, I was so excited. She had put her we didn't have one of those breakfast trays like they had on television, but she did have put the coffee in her best olive clear coffee cup, and it was on a saucer with a little spoon. And the thing I was most excited about was that the coffee cup was full. It was filled to the rim like brim. You see, I had never had my own cup of coffee. I had only had little sips from her cup, a teaspoon, a tablespoon, a here or there. But here was a whole cup of coffee that was just for me, unlike the ones in my little porcelain teacups. This was the real thing, and I was so excited. And she approached me. And I started to imagine all of the commercials that I had seen, the ones where people were putting their hands around a coffee cup, and there was always some blonde woman who was talking about how good this coffee smelled. And I remembered exactly what I was supposed to do. So I reached out and I started to put my hands around the coffee, and it was hot. It was so hot that I pushed it back at my mother, and this startled her. She flinched, and the coffee went up into the air and over my shoulder, my chest, and my back, scalding down to the bone. My shoulder started to ooze. And I was so upset, not because of the burn, but because I was not going to have this cup of coffee that I was so excited about. My mother called my grandmother before she called 911. My grandmother was a social worker, so she wanted to be sure she could tell the doctors exactly what she needed to tell them, because why would a parent be giving a little kid coffee? We went to St. John Hospital in Detroit, to the burn unit, and the doctors fixed my shoulder, and they had me cocooned in bandages. And all I could think about was that cup of coffee. I went home and I was out of school for another couple of days as my shoulder began to heal. And my aunts came to visit, and I had tomato soup out of a can. But my mother still asked me what I wanted, and I wanted coffee. So once again, she made me a cup of coffee. She cooled it down with some milk, put a little sugar in it, and presented it to me. And that was my satisfying and comforting thing. Now, you would think that an injury so severe would make me not be interested in coffee. But it was like any other childhood injury, where if you fell down the stairs or you break a limb, you get back up on the bike. And I got right back into my interest and love of coffee. And it was the thing that my mother knew that satisfied me and made me comfortable. And she made sure that I had it. I still love a pot of coffee. French press now, maybe not the instant stuff. I'm not going to see my mother this Thanksgiving. But whenever I do go home to Detroit, my mother will always ask me what I want. And she will always ask me if I want coffee. And the answer is always yes. And she always makes me a cup of coffee, puts it on a saucer with a spoon next to it. She puts a little bit of milk, just a little bit of sugar, and it's always satisfying and always good to the last drop. And it's still my favorite thing. Thank you.